everyone. Today, in our first episode of 5 Minutes of Linux, I'll be going over, rather quickly, 5 minutes or so, what Linux is, why you would want to use it, and then finally, I'll show you how to get a basic Linux distribution running in a virtual machine. Linux is a kernel that was developed in 1991 as a hobby project by this guy, random Finnish guy named Linus Torvalds and his friends. On top of the kernel, you add a bunch of utility programs to turn it into a usable operating system, and these are mostly made by the GNU project. And of course, as a layer on top of that, you add your own desktop stuff, or your distribution can, and on top of that, you add your applications. But why would you want to use Linux? Well, first of all, Linux is generally much faster, much more responsive, much lighter on your hardware. So whether you've got nice hardware that you want to get all the possible performance out of, or you've got a really old laptop and the difference between usability and not is running Linux rather than Windows, then that's obviously a very good use case. Secondly, there's privacy and security. By the nature of Linux, with most programs being open source, anybody can read the code and see if either there's an intentional privacy violation or there's an accidental problem with security. Third is customizability. On Windows or Mac OS, you're basically stuck with what the makers of the OS want you to have. Of course, they do provide a little bit of customizability. Like in Windows, you can change theme colors, that kind of thing. But if you want to change part of your system down to the core parts, then you can on Linux. Of course, there are many other reasons. For example, the way software is installed in Linux is much nicer and more convenient, and of course, quite a few other things, but this is 5 minutes, not 5 hours of Linux, so I won't go into that right now. But there are a couple kinds of people who I do not recommend to use Linux. The first kind is people who use their computers almost entirely for gaming. There are many good things about Linux, obviously, I've just listed them, but one of them is not really its gaming performance. Now, don't get me wrong, it's perfectly usable, and in future years it could even be better than Windows, but right now, it's just not there yet. Next is people that, their job is running software that doesn't run natively on Linux, and it's not worth their time to make workarounds to make it run, and sometimes it doesn't even run at all. So Adobe software, Microsoft Office, that kind of stuff. It's not going to work for you, obviously, because you need to use that software. It's an important part of your job, and it just doesn't work on Linux. Now we're going to install Linux in a VM. So the first thing to do is to install VirtualBox. So just search VirtualBox, go to their website, click Download VirtualBox, click for Windows hosts, save the file, and then once it's done, install it. Now you should have it installed, and it should look like this. Now download Linux Mint. Click the Cinema Edition download button. Scroll down and select the mirror closest to you. For me, that's USA. Save the file. This will take quite a while to download, so wait patiently. Once it's downloaded, make a new VM clicking the new button. Name it something like Linux Mint. This is a distro selector, but Ubuntu is close enough in this case. Give it I'd say 4 gigabytes of RAM. Create a virtual hard disk, stick with whatever defaults they select because they're fine in this case. Select the Linux Mint ISO you downloaded. In this case, it's the Linux Mint Cinnamon ISO. Now click Start. Press Enter. This will take a second to start up, so I have it sped up. Now you're here at a usable desktop. Press your super key / Windows key and just play around with it. So that's your homework, just play around with Linux.